Hi, how are you?
Right.
I'm Dr. Liliana Belkin, and I am at the University of Roehampton.
Then Gigi,
Hello, I'm Gigi. I'm currently at the University of Southampton.
last but not least, Shane.
Hello, and I'm Shane, and I'm based at Bishop Grosseteste Test University in Lincoln.
So we've got a lot of people with us today, which is great. Instead of sort of going around introducing everybody, which will take up a fair chunk of time, if you wouldn't mind just sort of putting into the chat your name, where you come from, and what your role is, that'd be fantastic. So thank you so much for joining us for our session Beyond Navel Gazing, Autoethnography as a Catalyst for Change. Now, we started planning this way back in October when we started thinking about what can we do that will support us as social justice researchers and people interested in this field. We wanted to do something that was going to be accessible to researchers as well as people who are still working in schools and educational establishments. We wanted something that was going to be accessible to people who are beginning their research careers, as well as people who are highly experienced researchers. And we thought autoethnography would be a great way of doing this, that we would have a session talking about autoethnography and invite people to work on producing a blog about an autoethnographic activity that you will hopefully undertake, that will be shared by Bera. Hopefully we can then sort of have a use that for other outputs, such as like a series of blogs. So we thought this would be a really interesting opportunity for everybody in our social justice community to get involved in. And it's great to see so many people here. Now, we're going to have people who've got varying experiences of autoethnography. We're going to have people who are, have a high level of expertise in it probably and might have published in it. We might have people like myself who are very new to this approach. So what we're going to do to start off with is just kind of give an outline of autoethnography, and that's what we'll do to start off with, and then think about a project that we might want to look into a little bit more. So on the next slide, so thank you to all the people who are putting their comments into the chat. That's great to hear and see. So what we're going to be doing to start off with, thinking about social justice, how we can use autoethnography to support us in this domain, and how we can use it to challenge inequalities through our work. So to start off with, we're going to share a Menti meter with you, and we've got a question for you to tell us about what you know about autoethnography so far. So we'll just put that into the chat. There's also a QR code there if you're all fancy and can take a picture of that. Is it going to be yes, it's being recorded, and I think it's going to be made available. And see that's gone into the chat. Let's have a look. Debbie, of course you're welcome here. So in case you haven't used Menti before, go to menti.com and then you type in that code 2118731.
Or that's a link directly link you to the form in the chat.
Yes, here it is. Right. I'll count down from 5. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So thank you so much for all those contributions. We can maybe have a quick scan through those, maybe. So, yeah. So we've got a real range of experience, haven't we? People who haven't used it before, to other people who've used it a little bit more extensively. So hopefully we'll have something of interest to everybody today. Lots of expertise that we'll be able to tap on as well. So thank you very much for those contributions. And then we'll move on to the next slide, I believe.
Okay, so when we started thinking about providing this session, we were thinking about, well, where are we coming from as individuals? Where are we coming from as researchers? And where do we find ourselves at this time? And I think the thing to think about is well, what is research and what research is valued? So the idea of autoethnography is interesting in itself, because if we think about research as an entity in itself, there are those forms of research which are highly valued and highly prized, and those forms of research which may do not receive the same sort of valorization or adulation. But looking beyond the traditional and looking beyond that which is accepted, research gives us the genuine opportunity to be knowledge creators. And in that knowledge creation, it's important that there is a multiplicity of voices, because this is the social justice SIG. And if knowledge creation only becomes the preserve of the precious few, then by its very nature, it is going to be exclusive and exclusionary in nature. That just can't be right. If we're thinking about a social justice framework, if we're thinking about a social justice lens, then the idea that we start from a premise that some groups are routinely excluded has got to be challenged. So autoethnography is another form of creating knowledge, is another form of creating understanding. And research has come under fire. I spoke to my colleagues before, so I'm not speaking out of turn here, but I just had to use the 2 words Donald Trump. I just had to come to tonight's session and use those 2 words, because I daily hold my head in despair that we live in a world which is post-truth. We live in a world where all sorts of fake information can be accepted as fact. I think being part of a research community gives us wonderful opportunities, but also places on us the real challenge that that knowledge which we do engage in creating is knowledge which is going to be valued and valuable and is going to promote that social justice agenda. So while we're under attack, and while this idea of being an intellectual and being a thoughtful, reflective practitioner, while all of this is coming under attack, I think as researchers, we have a heightened obligation to the broader research community. And I think one of these problems of research is this idea of common sense. So if I look at things, this idea of common sense has long been the preserve of a population of which I'm not part. So the idea of common sense has long been the population preserve of privileged white males. And I find myself, by that whole definition, completely excluded. And yet I'm unhappy with that. And I don't want to be pushed to one side, and I don't want to be thought of as the passed over population. I don't want to be conceptualized in that way. I want to be part of the population which creates knowledge, which can be at the table with all other knowledge forms. Scientific research is often held up as the gold standard. The DFE, the Department for Education, regularly hold it up as the standard to which we must all aspire to. And this idea of randomized controlled trials is something that the Department for Education is extremely keen on. And yet, the whole idea of randomized controls trials also has a problem when it comes to social justice. Because if some people are included in the trial and some people are excluded from the trial, is that a fair thing to do? So there has to be other ways of creating knowledge, and there has to be other ways of knowing, and there has to be some other way of valuing intellectual pursuits. We're all part of this dialogue. We all have a place at the table. We arrive with that right to sit at the table. And I think embracing that right and saying, well, I'm going to use that, and I'm going to use that to create a different form of knowledge, which is equally valuable and equally helpful. Gigi, can you move the slide on, please? Okay. So how can we know something? How do we know things? All sorts of ways of knowing, all sorts of different ways of knowing. And we probably all have our own personal internal compasses that we use on a regular daily basis. Those personal internal compasses have probably been informed by all sorts of things. I would bet money on the fact that some of your, and notice I said fact there, I would bet money on the fact that some of your personal internal compasses were formed in childhood. They were formed by a process that you were regularly exposed to, that you were regularly engaged with, and you were given it as a way of understanding things. Some of that would have been based on the idea of collecting data. So you would have been told to look at people and to gather data in that way. You have been told to listen to people and to gather data in that way. And you will have been given a set of rules to work with. So you will have been told how you could engage in certain arenas. You would have also brought your own way of understanding to that. And so this idea that knowledge is something that's detached and outside of us is a very difficult concept to understand, because before anything happens, we bring ourselves to the table. And although we may engage in certain forms of research like phenomenology, where we're encouraged to bracket our understanding off, essentially we bring ourselves to the table each and every time. And that bringing ourselves to the table is not in and of itself a difficult thing. What it does do is that we have to find some way of being aware of that. And we have to find some way of looking at our own internal knowledge sets and then think about how that may impact on the areas that we're going to work with. So essentially, using this schema, we are at the center of the knowledge creation process. And we are the knower. We are part of that wider community, but we are at the center of it. And all these different features feed within it. So as I said, I will bring my emotional self to it. I will bring my historical sense with it in terms of my memory and what I already know and understand. I will do that thing where I imagine new worlds and new ways of being. And imagining new worlds and new ways of being is an essential part of research, because often research is asking us to think about a different world and a different way of conceptualizing information. To only base something on imagination would be a contestable knowledge claim, but certainly it feeds within that. And certain forms of knowledge are routinely, in some ways, almost diminished. So this idea of indigenous knowledge, there are cultural experiences where that is pushed to the fringes, it's pushed to the margins, it's not acknowledged and accepted. And yet, indigenous knowledge probably predates the other forms of research processes that we use on a routine basis. So in terms of knowing something and in terms of creating something, this event is asking you to center yourself. Center yourself as an expert of a being in the world and understanding that world. You will have that inherent understanding. You will feed in other processes, but you will use your own way of being to inform how you will move forward and how you will start to build and develop a new kind of knowledge. Next slide, please, Gigi. So putting you, and this is really right, yeah, so just to ensure holding on to that concept of putting you at the center of all understanding and valuing your personal being and valuing your personal histories is how we are hoping to use autoethnography in this event, and it's how we're hoping that you will be using autoethnography between this event and the subsequent event to actually start to engage in a small project, but we'll talk more of that later. And now it is, next slide, please, Gigi.
Hi, so it's over to me. So this slide just shows a definition of what is autoethnography from Carolyn Ellis, who is one of the main theorists in this area, or methodologists. Research, writing, and method that connect the autobiographical and personal to the cultural and social. The form usually features concrete action, emotion, embodiment, self-consciousness, and introspection, and claims the conventions of literary writing. So I think that's a very helpful brief overview. And I think from most of the things that I've read, this emphasis on mixing or combining autobiographical with ethnographic elements is key. And you could go to the next slide, Gigi. So this is a helpful, rather short video. It's about 7.5 minutes with Professor Eric Anderson that sort of talks about how autoethnography works in practice. There are some critiques. We're aware of some critiques of Professor Anderson's views by more traditionalists, but we thought it's a useful and informative video. So we're just going to play the video for you.
And I'm going to take that to the next level, which we call autoethnography. Now, auto in this case means oneself. And ethnography means to do essentially a scientific study on oneself. Now, this is a concept that doesn't fit well with everybody because, you know, the problem with ethnography is, and ethnography is really good, except for it's not very generalizable. And there's a problem of what we call going native, losing your criticality, right? Sympathizing too much with the people you're studying and failing to highlight some of their problems, issues. So with autoethnography, you're not just going native, you are, you know, you couldn't be more native. You are essentially within your natal self. You see and understand the world through the way you see and understand the world. So how are you supposed to analyze how you see and understand the world when you're analyzing you, right? It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense in that capacity. So I think it's very fair to say that autoethnography is not a social scientific tool that is used all that often. And it is certainly not a social scientific tool that has sort of the highest levels of respect amongst academics. But this is not to say that autoethnography fails to have a place within the academic realm of research. If you take somebody who's a skilled ethnographer and who has a reason to study themselves, then you may have a good purpose for a autoethnography. Now, you might be wondering, like, how is an autoethnography any different than a biography? So, or a autobiography. So I'll just give an example here. So I have written a book called Trailblazing. And this is about my experiences coming out of the closet as America's first openly gay high school coach. The year was 1993. There was a very high degree of cultural homophobia in America, particularly in the county that I came out. And coming out created this sort of firestorm that I wrote about. And I was a very successful coach. And so there's this really nice drama of my athletes and I battling and winning, right? You know, both on the field and off the field, battling runners on the field, on the track, and battling homophobia off the track. Well, it's actually on the track as well, but you get the idea. There's these two themes here. And so it's a compelling story. But to make it an autoethnography, it has to have something more than just a telling of the events. It has to have some evidence. It has to be based in notes that are taken at the time. It has to have some form of validity to it. So for me, my autoethnography came from the fact that I took it from my journal. I wrote my journal because we all know that memory doesn't serve us well. Memories are easily created that are not true. We gloss over things. Memory is highly falsifiable. But I took a diary that I kept for 4 years on my experiences after coming out, and I used that as the basis to craft what went into my autoethnography. Now, I also backed that up with some interviews. So I sent, I asked some of the key players on the team if they saw things the way that I did. And then the other thing I did is I sent out that manuscript for essentially what we call peer review to the peers that were in the story. And I asked them, if they thought that this resonated, if there's anything that wasn't quite right. And so essentially you're doing some fact checking to make sure that you keep the validity of the story up. But the next thing that autoethnography ought to have is not just, like, how do we know this was said, and what is the facts, and how do we know that these facts are real, and how do we know that this isn't just one's biased perception of their own interactions. And by the way, actually, before I get to the next part, we can also judge autoethnographies, because if you're reading an autoethnography and the person is just always displaying themselves in the best light possible, right, you know there's something funny there, right? If they're not saying, and here's when I made a big mistake, and here's what I feel bad about, because we are all human beings, we all make mistakes. And so if you're only showing one side of the story, then you're really going to trust the whole thing. So you have to have that. You got to have that proof, if you will, bit of social proof to make you credible. But the other thing we have to have is some concept of sociology or anthropology in general. And you have to relate the experiences that you're having through some theoretical modality. Now, there are a number of types of theory, and those run from grand theories and philosophies to what we call macro, meso, and right down to micro theories. And I'm not saying that an autoethnography has to have a particular type of theory, but there needs to be a relationship between what goes on there and what goes on either in the local culture or the broader society at large. And there needs to be this theoretical application. So for me, for example, the theoretical application that I used in this one is this notion that I call it homohysteria, which is that heterosexual men, when they are afraid of being thought gay, they will act out in homophobic ways. But when they're not afraid of being thought gay, they won't. And so, there's sort of this basis here. There's this some theoretical basis of social prejudice that occurs, that comes into the book. And so I might be telling a story. It might be a compelling story about a time that something horrific happened to one of the athletes on my team, horrific homophobic incidents. But I still draw in, some theoretical understandings of why that might have happened, right? So I base it in sociological literature more broadly. And when you do that, that is an academic autoethnography. For me, I decided the academic autoethnography, it was just a bit too much. It took away from the compelling story. So, there's no references in my book. I published it and I called it an autobiography, although I think actually it's much, much closer to a autoethnography. So that's the role of autoethnography. It's some serious navel gazing. It's some serious navel gazing, right? You're really looking at yourself. But hey, if you have a compelling story, then, might be an absolutely fantastic form of research method to understand your relationship to society a bit more broadly. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that. I actually like that explanation. I think it's really helpful. Can we go to the next slide, Gigi, when you have a chance? Thank you. So as Professor Anderson discussed in that video, you can use a number of different tools or methods. You can use participant observation, interviews, focus groups, narrative analysis, maybe in your own journals, diaries, field notes, critical incidents. We also have this point, conversational engagement, which Shane discussed as sort of like when you maybe overhear certain things or things come out in conversation that then you reflect on or document in some way later, or where you overhear. So you can draw from a number of different sources or use a variety of tools to develop the autoethnography. And I think it's your turn, Gigi.
Yeah, thank you. So right, thank you. Okay, so I've got a tiny bit of experience in autoethnography. So I really think it's a very useful methodology for all of us because it embraces who we are, especially, so my background, before I start my doctoral study, I was actually working as a music practitioner. So my experience of doing the autoethnography is actually, I run like an interactive drama theater, which we've got drama practitioner, puppeteer, choreographer, music practitioner. So we work together to put on production and trying to promote this heritage language. And in our setting, it's the language of Cantonese. So what we found autoethnography is it actually gives practitioner a chance to really reflect on their experience, and also just like what he says, kind of call on our experience to embrace who we are and also our input. Lots of the times when practitioner, when we talk about like research or studies with them, they'll be like, that's not me, all right? I'm not going to do any research. But autoethnography is basically giving us like an opportunity to reflect on our experience. So that's what I do it with the team that I was currently working with. So we kind of do like a collaborative autoethnography. So it's basically helping us to contribute to each other's lives and encourage us to reflect on the narratives that we presented. So it's really great, and especially for if you're working with practitioners, I would say. However, of course, there are limitations of autoethnography. You can disagree, and that will be a great point to start discussion later on. So as you can see, so sometimes it's really, I would say this one is the most important one, is like possible evocation of challenging feelings. So in my case, when we're doing collaborative autoethnography, so basically as practitioner, we do diaries, and then we share our diaries with each other, and we talk about our experience and acting as a front stage in the production and also the preparation stage. So there are times that these feeling will come up, but then so how do we sort it out is we kind of put the diaries aside for a period, let it sink in a little bit, and then we bring it back and we discuss it again. So there are ways of like we can really help to minimize the tensions that these limitation brings in, and also this is very important as well. So it's exposure of inner feelings and thoughts which require honesty and willingness to self-disclose. So perhaps later on we can discuss further about that as well. So we've got some tasks here, I suppose.
Yeah, right. Back to me. So hopefully you found it interesting so far. What we're going to do is we're going to go into breakout rooms shortly and have a chat about what we could do for an autoethnographic project. So what we're going to do is ask you to think about a social justice issue relevant to you that you might wish to explore, and also think about a method that you might want to use. Are you going to want to use a diary? Are you going to want to use field notes? What could you be using for that project? And just give you, we'll give you a bit of time to think about that shortly. But just to sort of outline what we're going to do is, at the next session, we're going to invite people, you know, maybe it's 3, maybe it's a few more, to share their autoethnographic project with us, with the other people who've attended. And we are also going to talk about how we can turn this into individual Beera blogs as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to share another Menti with you to consider, just to put down what sort of area you might want to look at and what sort of method you might want to look at before we put you into breakout rooms. So hopefully that makes sense. And Gigi's just put in the chat the link to it. So hopefully you've all managed to open it. What are you going to be doing? What sort of method are you thinking of using? Hi, Karen.
Hi, sorry, I missed the very start of this, so I just wanted to check, can this be something that we're working on already, or is this, you know, a new venture, a new project that you're conceiving of?
I'm sure my fellow SIG conveners can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if you're already working on this, I think that'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's sort of tangentially kind of part of a doctoral project, or?
I think you can still include it.
Okay, thank you.
The only thing you might want to think about, Karen, is does it compromise your data collection for your doctorate? Because if you were hoping to publish this sort of like section of it, would that in any way put the data that you've collected for your doctorate in terms of originality? Would it compromise it in any way? So it's absolutely fine, but you need to consider, does it work for you, or does it compromise your doctoral data in any way?
Brilliant, thank you.
Great, we're getting some responses through. Such varied responses so far. lots of different areas, which is great. Somebody's doing a postgraduate assignment, which we're hoping to use. Sounds like a good plan to me. Yeah, that looks great. I think by the looks of it, everybody will have contributed now. So, thank you for that. I'm already really excited to see what people end up producing. It looks great. So what we're going to do, we are going to put you into small breakout rooms and just give you a chance to talk about what you want to do as your project, what method you're going to be using, any questions, queries you might want to talk to other people about. So we'll put you into that room and then we'll bring you all back and then just talk about the next stage of the project as well. So probably about 15 minutes. Dan will be able to put us into the rooms now. So I'm getting a message saying I'm being sent off shortly. I really enjoyed the conversation I was having. I think I could have stayed there for another hour talking about things. Yeah. So, yeah, that was really good. And what I really enjoyed from my group was just the variety of different ideas people had. So, I don't know, has anybody got does anybody want to share what their plan is, or has anybody got any questions that they'd like to talk about?
Somebody raise their hand.
Let's see. Donata, if I've said your name correctly.
And Florence, yeah.
Oh, sorry if I got it the wrong way around. Oh, no. Sorry, it was Donata first, then Florence.
Yeah.
Oh, no. I'm getting terribly confused by teams now, aren't I?
No, sorry, I just posted a message that I need to go, so that's...
Oh, okay.
And I'm just asking if you will send information about the next steps.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm really sorry, but I need to go. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Over to you, Florence.
It's just a reflection on the group that we were in, where positionality and outsider positions seem to be a theme that's kind of worked with most of us. I hope I'm not overstepping the boundaries or any confidentiality here of anybody's projects. And that just led me to, to ask a question. I mean, I don't have a problem with this outsider. It's something that I want to challenge in a possible story for myself. I haven't started anything, so I'm not, I'm not disclosing anything, anybody. But it sort of made me think: are autoethnographies told from the point of view of someone discovering, someone who is not in the center of things, or is it part of the nature, or is autoethnography possible if you are in a dominant position? And if you challenge this position, then effectively, are you scuppering it? I don't know. It's just, it's just reflection. Is autoethnography always a position of outsider or insider, but not quite in the midst of things? And can you do ethnography in a position of someone who is in a dominant position in an organization or in relation to others. I'm an academic developer, by the way. These things are prompted with this position. So it's just something to ask the group, really.
Can I respond?
Please.
The idea of positionality is critical to the autoethnography because it will affect the narrative that you bring to the table. Having said that, the idea that you have to be in a marginalized or position of being in some way minoritized, that isn't the case with autoethnography. One of the things that is missing from much research, and I'm not surprised, is we rarely in research do you hear the voices of the ultra-rich. The ultra-rich are extremely secretive. The ultra-rich do not talk about things very much. The ultra-rich say very little. So there is very little common understanding based on research on the lives and activities and the behaviours of the ultra-rich. We do it from observation. We do it from beyond. So the idea that you have to be minoritized is not it's what commonly happens in autoethnography, but it doesn't need to exclusively happen in autoethnography because it's that fact that anyone can engage in it. What it does require you to do is to do that period of reflection. And what it does require you to do is to support those reflections with additional information. Otherwise, it goes back to the title of this session that we've put together, which is it becomes navel gazing. And that's all it becomes. And we need to do beyond and outside that. So no, you don't have to be in that position of being the underdog all the time. That's not a requirement of it. But more commonly, that's what happens because those people that are in those privileged positions already have a seat at the table, and by default, it's almost as though their rule book then dictates what happens to everybody else. But we don't have that detailed understanding of the ultra rich and any other groups like that. I am not that surprised, but it seems to me that sometimes some of the younger people I speak to watch The Crown and see it as fact. Now, I'm not saying that it doesn't represent reality because I don't know, but what I am saying is if we had an autoethnographer from that inside circle, I wouldn't just have to rely on the Crown interpreting what they believe to be reality. I would have more reliable data to go to. So it doesn't have to, but often it is told from that position of marginalisation.
Okay, thanks.
Could I just ask a question based on that? Sorry, I was putting my hand up, I wasn't sure you could see. Hi, I'm Esther, lecturer from UWL. Yeah, I'm just really interested just to go back to the point about reliability, just to unpack that. And so what I wanted to ask you was, when you say, you know, if it's purely navel gazing, that's obviously not what we want. And you kind of talked about reflection with other information. So I just wanted to clarify what you meant by other information. Do you mean the theoretical lens? Do you mean participant observation, some other form of kind of ethnography in order for it to be reliable in terms of an academic sense?
Is it all right to respond to that?
Yes.
I mean both, because you do have to have that broader theoretical lens in order for it to have that academic location and that academic theoretical perspective. But inevitably speaking, if I choose to do autoethnography, my story overlaps with other people's stories. I am currently engaged with, I'm one of four. I have three brothers. My brother and I are currently working with some journalists because they want to do something on the Windrush. The reason they're speaking to us is because our dad came over on the Windrush. So I am aware when my brother speaks to this journalist that is one voice, but it's a male voice, and the male experience growing up in the UK is different from the female experience. So it's important that I also get a seat at that table. So for that to count as research, it's good that they've now got two perspectives, a male perspective and a female perspective. My story, inevitably, if you were to draw a Venn diagram, all of our stories, if we operate in the social world, all of our stories will overlay to others. It's the extent with which they overlay that is significant. So yes, if we can collect further data, because otherwise, as I said, then there is a risk sometimes that autoethnographies are dismissed as the ramblings and rantings of an individual. I'm very, 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 can't put enough of those in, mindful of that, because we live in a world of very odd conspiracy theorists. So I am very alert to the need for me, if I'm going to make a claim and say this is knowledge, I have to have a base from which I can make that. So I would need also I will need my personal database, but I will need those broader theoretical lenses in which to locate it. Does that in any way answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, that's my point, and I think there's so much to unpack here, because I personally feel that the way we assess it is not necessarily, we don't yet have the, it's like, is the criteria by which we measure reliability appropriate for this approach? I think sometimes we're taking the criteria for assessing reliability from other approaches and applying it to this, and that's I don't know if anyone agrees with that, or to extend that point, and because I feel you could do an autoethnography, and that story is knowledge in itself, and it's got, who's to say, in terms of its contribution, it is contributing, it has value, you could argue, in and of itself. But I think I would say I agree that the theoretical lens is important as a kind of grounding that story. But I mean, would you agree that that's enough? Because I personally feel like, an autoethnography with a sort of theoretical grounding, for me, is of interest, is enough.
This is the messy world of research, and what would be accepted by some as enough will be rejected by others. This happens every time we engage in doing a piece of writing and put it out there in the public forum. We know that some people will say, what a wonderful piece of research this is. This speaks truth to power. This is great. And other people say, what a complete waste of time. Why do they even bother writing it? So that is the messy world of research. But I'd rather be in a mess than be silenced and excluded. I'd rather be in a mess and I say, okay, now defend your position. So anytime I do writing, I almost put myself in the mindset of, okay, I'm going back into my doctorate viva. There is a point at which some people will challenge me. I have what I refer to as my racist fan club. They are my racist fan club because they refute everything I say. But they're my fan club because they actually read my academic writing. And as a person who does academic writing, I'm very pleased that somebody bothers to read it. I'm disappointed they're racist and I never want to go out for a drink with them. But that's another matter. But again, when we talk about research and what it does, I can tell that that's having an impact now because it upsets them. And the fact that it upsets them on a regular basis makes me think I'm writing something that's of value. They would use a different metric. So there are a variety of metrics we can apply to writing. We have no one size fits all. And I don't want one size fits all, because that means I will only end up with one type of research.
Absolutely. So we've got to maintain that freedom, I think, in this field, don't we? In autoethnography, to kind of say, what counts as autoethnography is up for anyone's sort of definition, depending on who's reviewing it and what their criteria is. And from my perspective, you see, so I'm wanting to bring this in to the undergraduate students that I have on our programme, to give this tool, this approach for their dissertation project, which to me, just feels like it has endless possibilities of being far more meaningful approach to knowledge. So it's I feel like I'm dancing that dance of how to empower those students to have to make those inquiries using an approach like this, and at the same time it to be acceptable and academic enough, and whatever that means. So that's kind of my
And your last question of whatever that means is a great thing, because yeah, well, we are in a constant debate, and that's okay, because it means it means that I end up challenging myself on a regular basis, and that's okay, because it means that at least I'm being thoughtful and considered in terms of what I'm putting down there and what I'm writing and what I'm sharing. So it's good that I've got those self-checking processes, but I've got no problem with self-checking. I get a bit worried about self-silencing.
Yeah, and I think if we get too tied up in what is you know, quality autoethnography versus not, I think we just continue to hold it back, and that's my view, is that it's already undervalued, potentially under, you know, not taken seriously, you know, as a kind of method of social science inquiry, and actually we should be empowering it by not getting too stuck in, you know, it needs this with this in order for it to be acceptable in an academic kind of space.
Risk taking is fine. Risk taking is good.
Questions in the chat. I mean, for me, what I'm planning to do is just use my sort of research diary and take sort of critical incidents, I suppose you'd call them, and then relate it to literature in the field, sort of add that aspect to it. That's what I'm planning to do. So let's have a look. We've got some questions from Sylvia. Sounds like her doctorate's going really well. And I think the main question is, do I require permission from the people that were involved in supporting me before writing something? What do we think to that one? Would it be, I suppose, I mean, this is also coming back to the question of ethics, isn't it? And it's looking at the requirements for where you're working or studying in terms of ethical approval, and if you've already got ethical permission for that project, I would say. Anything else to add?
Well, John, it's for my PhD, we'll go through the full-blown ethical process because I'm in the first year of the 1+3 program, so it's a master's for the first year. But for this SIG activity that you've mentioned, I think you mentioned a deadline of July of people potentially presenting their ideas. So if it was something that's more based around the work that we're doing in the group, would I don't know whether it's a case of me not mentioning the names of the academics that were mentoring me, but whether there's an issue of me talking about the support they've given me without seeking their permission to talk about it or write about it.
Hey, can I put you on the spot and ask you what you think?
Ethics is always messy. So like I said, you've got to protect yourself, but you've also got to be fair to anyone that can be engaged in your process. So to alert people to the fact that you are a researcher, an active researcher, and you're constantly collecting data, sometimes they're not the focus of your work. I mean, under standard ethics, you wouldn't be seeking to name them in any event, but sometimes you are describing roles. So I don't know, a line manager or a student or something like that, or a middle-aged returning student. Now, I think if you can keep things sufficiently open, then it might be an easier thing to do. But it's really problematic because sometimes it's almost as though people become accidentally engaged in your autoethnography because their actions become part of your later reflections, but they're not somebody that you actively sought to engage within that research process. They just happened to be around, and then they're feeding into your research process. So sometimes you can, if it's clear and apparent you can alert people to the fact that some of your reflections may go, some of your reflections on their actions may be included in some of your writing. But sometimes you don't even know that until you get to the process when you go away and start to think about it, and then you start to process it yourself. It's almost as though you can't go into every environment knowing exactly what's going to happen. So a lot of this can happen in almost an incidental way, and therefore it's really difficult. And some of the people that you might want to reflect on drop out. I don't mean as in, but they're people that you lose contact with. So in terms of being able to inform them or seek their ethical permissions, it becomes really difficult. I think you need to wear a big badge on yourself saying, I am an active researcher and I research most of the time because that's what I do. Yeah. And there is no single set rule book. Often we know about the ethical issues when we get an ethical challenge later down the line. So we do all we can to minimize and mitigate that. But there may be times when it's really difficult. And that's why I think I've remained lifelong committed to the concept of having a study buddy. So if I hit a thing that I'm struggling with, I will talk it through with other study buddies, and I'm saying this is an ethical issue that I'm really struggling with. I don't know how to process this, and I don't know what's appropriate to do at this point. What do you think? So yes, I think we just tread cautiously and tentatively, bearing in mind our ethical obligations to everyone that we come encounter with.
Thank you. And from Donna, could anyone share an example of an autoethnography that they think illustrates the kind of thing we're aiming for, please? So I suppose for this, it's thinking about what we think the next steps are. So what we would be hoping for is some people would want to present at the next meeting on the 19th of July their autoethnographic projects, and just having a couple of slides, talking about the critical instance, talking about their research diary, relating it to theory, and then presenting it that way. That's one of the ways that could be presented. And we're also going to be working towards people putting something together so that it could be considered as a blog. So, I mean, how much? I think are they about 500 words? So it's clearly going to be different to an academic article, what you'd end up writing for that aspect as well. So I think just having a look at Beer blogs, just getting a sense of what that looks like, but working on your project. If you want to share it next time, great, let us know and we can see how many people can fit in. And then working towards this Beer blog. And at the next session, we will talk about that blog side a little bit more. Anything else to add to that?
And the research intelligence.
And research intelligence. So yes, what would be lovely to do as well is, if there's appetite for this, putting in a proposal to put out an edition of research intelligence as well, that we can see if people would want to contribute to as well. So that's something we could do further down the line. And then a question from Taylor, can I ask for further clarification on what conversational engagement involves and how to do it? Spot to answer that one. What we're going to do as well is we are going to put together a list of papers, send out materials if there's anything else that we think would be useful, and we can share that with people as well. Any comments from anybody? No? Hang on, let's see, is there another question down there? Yeah, we'll send some examples from Will. We'll look at that. Yes. Right. So for the next session, we can ask you to think about what you would like to do for your autoethnographic study if you would like to join us. And if you would like to share what you've done, you know, it's going to be really informal. Hopefully you've seen today, it's a sort of very informal and supportive environment that we've got in our group. You'll be able to do that. And then we'll talk a bit more about the next stage if people want to create a blog and submit that to Beer and hopefully they'll publish it. So what we've got a Google Doc that I'll just put into the chat. And if you are happy to do so, please fill that in about your name, email. I mean, I'm saying the obvious here, aren't I? The broad topic. If you'd like to share what you want to do, I mean, it would just be for a couple of minutes at the next meeting. And if you're interested in the blog, just so we get an idea and we can sort of follow up with people if they want to share next time. And luckily I've set up the Google Doc properly because people are typing in it. Right, well, I've really enjoyed the session. I can't believe how fast it's flown by for me. And it's been lovely to hear about all of the different ideas that people have got. And I'm really looking forward to the next session where we can learn more about people's autoethnographic work that they'll be working on. Is there any other comments from people?
Just to add, the Menti is still on. We can treat it as like a Padlet, and then you can still pop some ideas there, and then we're going to share the Menti result as a PDF and send it to you as well.
Yeah, that's great. Florence has got a question. I'd like to progress my idea, but by the 19th of July, you wouldn't be able to get it beyond a proposal. Could you still share this? That sounds great, talking about what the plan is. And then I know people are going to have different time frames and things. So that sounds great. Then, well, if that's everything, thank you so much for coming, and hopefully we see you at the next session.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.